Well, now I have the classic rock and roll song that was first a hit back in 1963 by the Crystals, produced by the man that's been called the best producer of the rock era. His name? Phil Spector. During the late 50s and through the 60s, his flamboyant behavior and flashy clothing, along with his insistence on absolute independence in the recording studio, made him one of the most famous characters in rock music. And at the same time, he became a rock and roll legend for his pioneer techniques in the studio as a record producer. During the 22 years of the rock era, Phil Spector is the only producer whose name on the label has sold as many records as the names of the recording stars that he's produced. During the last 2 decades, he's created hits by the Teddy Bears, the Crystals, the Ronettes, the Righteous Brothers, Ike and Tina Turner, and the Beatles. And many of the top artists and producers in the business, including the Beatles and Brian Wilson, have acknowledged Phil Spector as one of their biggest idols. At number 8 in this week's countdown, here's Sean Cassidy with his remake of a Phil Spector classic, Da Do Ron Ron. Da Do Ron Ron, originally produced by Phil Spector, this one produced by Michael Lloyd. That's Sean Cassidy at number 8. Well, now we're up to the Hall & Oates version of You've Lost That Lovin' Feelin', a giant hit from the mid-60s co-written by one of the most creative and mysterious characters in all of rock history, super producer Phil Spector. Phil Spector first appeared on the pop music scene in 1958. He formed a trio called the Teddy Bears with a boy and a girl from his high school, and they recorded a song whose title he took from the inscription on his father's tombstone, "To know him is to love him." It was a #1 smash. In the next 5 years, Phil Spector wrote and produced such rock classics as He's a Rebel, Da Do Ron Ron, Be My Baby, and Spanish Harlem, to mention a few. And it was on these records that he created his legendary Wall of Sound. Here's how writer Nick Cohen described that sound. Quote, "Through multi-tracking, Spector made his rhythm section sound like armies. No question, his records were the loudest, fiercest, most magnificent explosions that rock had yet produced or dreamed of. And Spector stood in the center, twiddling the knobs, controlling everything, like an infant in charge of Armageddon." End of quote. But in 1966, for whatever reason, just before his 26th birthday, Phil Spector announced his retirement. Since then, he's lived in seclusion. Oh, he comes out occasionally with his bodyguards to produce songs like Imagine for John Lennon and My Sweet Lord for George Harrison, then returns to his mansion to remain one of the great mystery figures of rock and roll. Well, this week, a song co-written by Phil Spector with Barry Mann and Cynthia Weil debuts in our countdown, coming in at number 34. Hall & Oates with You've Lost That Lovin' Feelin'.
Never close your eyes.
Daryl Hall and John Oates debuting at number 34, the highest debuting record of the week on American Top 40. Their ninth Top 40 hit is called You've Lost That Lovin' Feelin', as the countdown rolls on.
Casey's Coast to Coast.
I'm Casey Kasem, counting them down. Now, the story of one of the most famous flops of the rock era. A non-hit record that sent legendary record producer Phil Spector into retirement for 3 years. It was in late 1965 that Spector offered his considerable talents to the duo of Ike and Tina Turner. They were rhythm and blues stars and hadn't had a great impact on the pop chart. Spector thought he could do it for them. So a deal was struck, and Phil and Tina went into the studio to record a song called River Deep, Mountain High. They spent hours and hours in the studio getting that song right. Super producer Phil Spector thought it was the greatest production of his career. Let's listen to a piece of that record. River Deep, Mountain High by Ike and Tina Turner. Phil Spector thought it was the finest production he'd ever done. It was released in 1966 and spent only 4 weeks on Billboard's Hot 100 chart, peaking at number 88. Phil Spector was crushed. He felt so rejected he retired from producing for 3 years. Tina Turner also felt hurt, though she told writer Kurt Loder why she thinks the record failed. Quote, "It had no home. It was too pop for black radio, and the white station said, 'They're not a pop act, we can't touch it.'" End of quote. But River Deep, Mountain High did find a home in Great Britain. It went to number 3 over there.
Casey's Coast to Coast.
I'm Casey Kasem. You're listening to our Millennium Special, The 40 Days That Changed Music.
No, no, know him is to love, love, love him, and I do.
In a studio not far from the Beach Boys' hometown of Hawthorne, a 22-year-old producer worked tirelessly to create a sound of his own. In 1958, Phil Spector wrote and produced a #1 record for the Teddy Bears called To Know Him Is to Love Him. In 1961, he founded Phillies Records, where he created his wall of sound technique. Every inch of tape was layered with sound, lush orchestration, lots of echo and percussion, all in mono. Here's Phil with one of his classics, a record he co-wrote and produced for the Ronettes, Be My Baby. On our special Millennium Countdown, that's the trio known as the Ronettes with their classic hit, Be My Baby, produced by the legendary Phil Spector.
Counting down the hits with Casey Kasem.